bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Balmain.
Thank you very much, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise today to address this bill, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Amendment Bill 2012. We Greens support this bill. It's a modest change. I will be raising a few questions to the Minister and to the Minister's staff that are here to see whether or not some reasonable amendments could be considered by the Minister when it moves to the upper house. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking and acknowledging the Minister's staff and the Department staff and the Minister for the work that obviously goes into putting together all of these bills. It's a significant amount of work, and we should acknowledge the role in particular of those that put in such an effort to try to improve the situation here in New South Wales, in particular the staff in our great public service. I guess the approach on this is something that all of us support. Obviously, it's something we've all heard from people. It's something that I've worked quite a lot on, the animal welfare issue, because animal welfare, of course, is at the heart of a humane and just society, and it's an issue which many of people in the House haven't worked on. In particular, my time as Mayor of Leichhardt Council, and on Leichhardt Council I worked very hard to see what we could do to try to reduce the amount of euthanized animals, companion animals in our shelters and pounds. And as the Minister knows, I met with the Minister some time ago to talk about the issue of truth in labelling and how we label free range, in particular around free range eggs. And of course the issue around how we label free range meats and others is something that's quite significant. The bill that we have today is an important one. I understand that a range of groups have been consulted. I'd like to also acknowledge the work of all of the animal welfare organisations that I've been working with, the Humane Society International, Humane Choice, Animals Australia, Animal Liberation, Choice, the consumer group that I've worked with very closely on the issue of free-range labelling, and the Free Range Egg and Poultry Association of Australia. So I wanted to start by congratulating all of those animal welfare groups and those consumer groups that work to fight for better protection for animals. Now, if I can, Mr Temporary Speaker, turn specifically to the bill. We know that the object of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Amendment Bill is to amend the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1979 in a range of different ways. And I don't propose, Mr Temporary Speaker, to read through the briefing note, which goes through all the details of the actual. I did want to take the opportunity to ask a few specific questions. The bill, of course, is primarily aimed at failure to provide cases for offences for failure to provide animals with food, drink or shelter. And the Minister in the first read speech referred to drought situations as being when these provisions were needed. So we understand there is a real need for this. But when it comes to some specific questions, I note that the Legislative Review Committee commented that although these provisions for denial of compensation for livestock has been that where the denial of compensation where livestock has been unilaterally seized and disposed of, the committee notes the overarching public interest to prevent and stop animal distress. In such circumstances, the committee doesn't consider that unduly a trespass on personal rights and liberties. I think it's important we acknowledge that, because in a bill that's something that you don't want to necessarily see happen. You want to make sure that that type of approach isn't something which is undertaken, but it's pretty clear that there is an overarching public interest in this matter. Another point which I'd like to go to, which I hope the Minister may be able to respond to in terms of a clarification, is the Stock and Welfare Panel. I understand it will include an inspector authorised under the Act. So does that mean that there will always be a representative from the RSPCA or Animal Welfare League on the Stock Welfare Panel? Just clarifying that. Thank you. The Minister's indicated that's correct. So I appreciate the Minister's response on that. Just a few other issues in terms of the bill. I noticed that one of the enforcement agencies for the POCTA, the Animal Welfare League, in the past have talked about one of the challenges about entering structures, because clause 24P5A, which talks about entering land where animals are kept. Now, one of the challenges, and I'll just go to that, 24P5A. So it talks about that when it comes to inspecting, they can enter any land where animals are kept. Now, one of the issues with that, it excludes any type of structure. So, for example, we've seen situations where the inspectors can visit a property under the current provisions, and they're permitted to enter that property boundary, but they're not permitted, obviously, to enter a dwelling. And so the definition of dwelling is obviously... Well, there's obviously the definition of dwelling is open to interpretation. There's restricted circumstances for entering a dwelling which are appropriate, and they are the power to enter land. 1, an inspector may enter land for the purpose of exercising any function under this division. 2, despite subsection 1, an inspector may exercise a power under the division to enter a dwelling only with the consent of the occupier of the dwelling, the authority of a search warrant, or if the inspector believes that on reasonable grounds that A, an animal has suffered significant physical injury, is in imminent danger of suffering significant physical injury, or has a life-threatening condition that requires immediate veterinary treatment, so very narrow. And B, it is necessary to exercise the power to prevent further physical injury or prevent physical injury to the animal, or to ensure that it is provided with veterinary treatment. These restrictions are appropriate, obviously, to enter into a dwelling, but I would ask the Minister to consider whether or not it would be appropriate to include something, for example, to enter on any land and make the additional words "or structure" on that land where animals are kept, and add the words "that is not a dwelling." So it doesn't mean that the entering of dwelling is an issue, but a structure at the moment is not able to be entered. And the restrictions are appropriate for entry into a dwelling. The inspector should be able to enter a structure on the land where animals are kept that is not a dwelling. So that distinction is just something that we'd like to have the Minister clarify if that's possible. Another point which I may refer to is clause 24T1D. Now, this refers to the panel again, and this is a panel with a regulatory function established to give advice on the welfare of the livestock for the purposes of enforcement, and that's a positive thing which is supported. Now, the provision is quite broad in terms of providing for the regulations to allow any person to be invited on the panel.
Did you mean like a hay shed or something like that?
Yeah, some other. Sorry, forgive me. Yeah, some other structure. So just to make that clarified. Yeah. So it would not be appropriate, for example, to invite stakeholders in an advocacy role on that panel. Advocacy obviously isn't something that's included on the panel. Now, the Minister flagged in the second reading speech that representatives such as New South Wales farmers could be invited onto the panel if the stock owner wanted it. And I'm just not comfortable that it's appropriate for the panel with a regulatory and enforcement function. Surely it would be better for persons invited onto a panel should be those with animal welfare expertise, such as the Minister's other suggestion for experts in animal nutrition. So that point just goes to what type of person should be included, and I'm looking to see whether the Minister will consider or comment on an insertion in 24T1D such persons or persons to include with an expertise in animal welfare, so that that can be made sure that any new addition